good evening, everyone in Geneva. Good morning, good afternoon, if you're in other places in the world. And we're now starting the final and concluding panel of the day. If you recall now, in the morning, we started the conference by reiterating how 2021 has been a pivotal year for cyber diplomacy. The GGE and the open-ended working group both came to a successful conclusion and made meaningful progress on previously agreed concepts and principles. Now, a new resolution co-sponsored by the Russian Federation and the United States during this year's UN General Assembly First Committee stressed that it is in the interest of all states to promote the use of all information and communication technologies for peaceful purposes and to prevent conflicts arising from their use. Now, it's a very timely statement also if you consider that increasingly we're seeing cybersecurity having an impact on global strategic stability. Now, this resolution prepared the ground very nicely for the new open-ended working group by recognizing the efforts made by previous processes, by reaffirming the leading role of the United Nations that should continue in promoting dialogue, and by calling upon member states to be guided in their use of ICTs by the two reports produced earlier this year. Now, over the course of the day, we've heard a series of deep dives into the specific elements of the framework of responsible state behavior, and we've heard ideas and perspectives from different stakeholders about how to maximize returns from this new open-ended working group. In the final panel of the day, we now want to take a step back and have more of a bird's eye perspective on both the past and the future of these intergovernmental processes at the UN relating to cyber. And I'm delighted to say that we have two speakers who will help us to do exactly that, deliver this bird's eye perspective. Honored and delighted that we're joined by two speakers who really don't need much introduction in front of a cyber audience of cyber experts. Delighted that Michele Markoff is joining us. She's the acting coordinator for cyber issues at the United States Department of State. And Ambassador, I don't see him yet on screen, but I think Ambassador Andrei Krustchik, Director of the Department of International Information Security of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Welcome to both of our speakers. And maybe we can start off with a short and simple question just now. Well, I'm not sure simple, but a short question. And maybe Michele Markoff, you can kick things off and we look into the past. What lessons can we learn from past experiences relating to the intergovernmental processes on cyber at the United Nations? Michele Markoff, over to you, please.
Well, what we can learn is that what we do on cyberspace in any multilateral context is often highly dependent on the larger security environment that we live in. And these things are all part of a larger fabric of peacemaking or conflict prevention, however you want to talk about it. And often it is the success of our efforts has been subject to the vagaries of the international environment. Certainly what happened this year, which was the culmination of over 12 years of activities, was, I would say, serendipity. It turned out very well, but I think that all of us who were involved were not necessarily predicting such a positive outcome. But, you know, it requires the confluence of a variety of interests, and in this case, quite extraordinarily, we had the interests of 193 member states in the OEWG, and then the 25 GGE participants all coming to a similar conclusion. And that conclusion is that we need a standard of conduct for states against which we can measure states' behavior and provide a quality understanding of how to preserve stability in cyberspace.
Thank you so much. And over to Ambassador Krusczyk. What lessons can we learn from past experiences?
Distinguished Chair, Mr. Geiss, dear Michele, it's a pleasure to see you. I'm here to represent Ambassador Krusczyk. Let me introduce myself. My name is Vladimir Shin. I'm Deputy Director of this Department of International Information Security of the Russia's MFA. For me, it's first time to speak at the UNIDIR, and I'm glad to have this opportunity of an informal exchange with my colleagues, with whom we have achieved a genuine breakthrough this year. This year indeed is a remarkable one. I would call it a record year in the global discussion on issues of ICT security. Despite all the challenges and restrictions caused by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, despite natural differences among states on very sensitive issues of ICT security, we succeeded in achieving very meaningful results. As Michele already mentioned, in March we managed to adopt by consensus the final report of the first OEWG. In May, we replicated this success and concluded successfully the work of the group of governmental experts. And furthermore, as esteemed Chair mentioned, on November 3rd this year, the first committee of the UN General Assembly adopted by consensus the joint Russia-US resolution developments in the field of information and telecommunications in the context of international security and advancing responsible state behavior in the use of ICTs. It was co-sponsored by an unprecedented number of 108 states. We consider this document as an important milestone, as it not only helps to maintain positive momentum of the UN cyber negotiations and creates constructive atmosphere, but also demonstrates ability of the world community to rise beyond differences and agree where agreement is possible. It is our important lesson. It's our common achievement, and it sets a certain landmark that we all should refer to in our future work.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Shin. So let's turn to the future then, and back to Michele Markoff. How can the international community now make the best use of a 5-year mandate? And also, if I may add, how would you define success? What would success look like in 2025 for the open-ended working group?
The main point that I would make is that while we cannot rest on our laurels, that is, we can't assume that what we've done so far, we need to look to the future. What we've achieved in the past is extremely important and provides a foundation for us in the ultimate task of maintaining peace and international stability. But we need to do better at anticipating the challenges as they are emerging. This technology that we're talking about, ICTs, has been revolutionary, not evolutionary. And we've done a good job at trying to describe the threats and the implications for all of our national security by the emergence of these technologies and their use by states and, in fact, non-state actors. Looking how we might manage issues as they inevitably arise with emerging technology is going to be very important. And as a matter of fact, I think we you know, we've learned a lesson over the last 20 years of these discussions that we were slow to recognize the implications of this technology for international security. So I think if we work together to look to the future, focusing as we have, quite importantly, not on the technologies themselves, but on the effects that they may have on humankind and how we can mitigate any destructive or disruptive effects. I think that's what success looks like over the next few years. A platform where states can continue the hard work of ensuring that the development of digitally connected technologies does not lead to inadvertent conflict.
Thank you very much. And now the connection was stable. This was all loud and clear. And I fully agree. We must not rest on our laurels. And then I also personally think that, you know, developing this capacity to anticipate future challenges, convergence effects between the different digital technologies, that's something that will be important going forward, especially now that we're going to see an exponential application of these technologies. And over to you, Mr. Shin, the Russian perspective on the best use of a 5-year mandate and what might define success in 2025?
Well, Mr. Geiss, I don't think that we have to wait until 2025. In fact, it was a proposal made by the chair of this group, Ambassador Burhan Ghafour. He said that we don't have to wait for 5 years to reach any kind of agreement. We could, you know, using that principle of an early harvest, we could fix the agreements as they appear. And we fully support that because that would, you know, that would help this group to become not report-oriented, but rather result-oriented. And I fully agree with Michele that we should not, you know, rest on laurels and think that that atmosphere, that unique atmosphere that has been created, is for granted. We have to continuously put in our efforts to maintain and preserve that very, you know, unique spirit of genuine cooperation and compromise. And it should be cherished and preserved by all parties concerned, because we all face the same challenges and threats. We must continue our interaction dialogue in a positive and constructive manner and should aim high for achieving very concrete results that are badly needed by everyone. We think that we're lucky to have this universal format, I mean the OEWG, because it's already proven its efficiency, since this is an inclusive and transparent mechanism. The OEWG process is based upon the principle of consensus, and that ensures that decisions are made while taking into account the interests of all the participants of this process. You know, the starting point for the OEWG process is, you know, is set very clearly in the mandate, in the resolution. And, you know, the resolution envisages the possibility of establishing thematic subgroups within the OEWG to facilitate a more thorough, more detailed discussion on very specific elements of its mandate. And we think that, you know, this way of organizing its discussions is an effective one, and we should, you know, go that way. We think that among those subgroups or thematic clusters or whatever you call it, the priority should be given to the subgroup on threats and rules of responsible behavior. There are also other groups, subgroups, that might be established, such as a very important one on applicability of international law to the ICT sphere, or confidence building measures, or capacity building and regular institutional dialogue. Basically, we have already stated our position on this on many occasions, and we still stick to it. States may suggest establishing additional subgroups within the OEWG if they would think that it is necessary. For the sake of a better coordination of work, as well as to provide equal opportunities to all participants of the process, it would be rational to hold subgroup meetings in a consecutive order within each substantive OEWG session. At the same time, intersessional work, primarily virtual consultations, will be of great importance. And here I would like to touch upon one pending organizational issue of stakeholder participation in the group's work. Russia supports the chair in his intention to follow the precedents of the first OEWG and engage stakeholders, those who have consultative ECOSOC status, at informal meetings, as it seems to be the most appropriate and acceptable way forward. However, at the same time, we cannot ignore signals that are coming from other members of the international community that they wish to see a broader stakeholder engagement. We feel that this issue has to be addressed somehow, and as one of the options, we would suggest considering the following. Why not UNIDIR takes up this role of an intermediary of this process? What I mean is dialogue between the states and the stakeholders, non-state actors. As you might remember, the resolution 75-40 reads that the open-ended working group may decide to interact as appropriate with other interested parties, including businesses, non-governmental organizations, and academia. So it means that the OEWG process is a state-driven process. States are main actors, and stakeholders, they supplement, they add up to the state discussions. But at the same time, if we think about it in greater details, what states are discussing and what they're agreeing upon finally would have the goal to accommodate the needs of those stakeholders as well. So preferably there should be some kind of interactive dialogue between those two components of this one process. And we think that any possibility for accommodating such dialogue should be considered. And we think that UNIDIR, it would be natural and logical to assume that UNIDIR could, assume a greater role in this process and act as an interface, if we use the ICT language, between those two parts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and also for your suggestions and proposal to UNIDIR, which of course will be happy to consider. But I would like to, maybe on a substantive question, go a little deeper now. So we've looked at the past. We clearly have looked at the 5-year mandate and what might happen there. But let's turn to a substantive issue, vulnerability of critical infrastructure. And of course, the first committee resolution that your two governments co-sponsored emphasized concerns over the vulnerability of critical infrastructure to malicious cyber activities. Now, my question is, in addition to promoting adherence to the norm that calls for states not to conduct, not to support malicious acts against critical infrastructure, what else can be done to tackle these concerns and to reinforce the resilience of critical infrastructure? Michele Markoff, over to you, please.
Thank you. Obviously, critical infrastructure issues were a key part of our considerations in the recent GGE report. And as the report says, ICT activity that intentionally damages critical infrastructure or otherwise impairs the use and operation of critical infrastructure to provide services to the public can have cascading domestic, regional, and global effects. And the focus is such because such activity poses an elevated risk of harm to the population and indeed can be escalatory, possibly leading to conflict. So that risk is why several of the norms in the GGE and OEWG reports refer to the implications for the protection of critical infrastructure. The norm 13G says that states should take appropriate measures to protect their critical infrastructure from ICT threats. And here in the United States, we've taken this commitment quite seriously, including adding $2 billion in new funding for cybersecurity improvements for state and local governments and for critical infrastructure sectors, ranging from electric grids to transportation infrastructures to public sector services. The U.S. government has also issued new security directives for critical infrastructure operators and has launched an initiative for industrial control systems that increases the resilience of electric utilities, pipelines, and the water sector. Norm 13H says that states should respond to appropriate requests for assistance by another state whose critical infrastructure is subject to malicious ICT acts, and states should also respond to appropriate requests to mitigate such malicious ICT activities aimed at the critical infrastructure of another state emanating from their territory. These are important statements. Again, these are norms that are intended to be observed below the threshold of the use of force on a daily basis during peacetime. We recommend that all states, as they look to implement the framework of responsible state behavior, consider how to increase and enhance the resilience of their own critical infrastructure.
Thank you. And over to you, Vladimir Shin. What else can be done to tackle the concerns and to reinforce the resilience of critical infrastructure?
Thank you, Mr. Geiss. Well, as one of those who actually participated in the process of, negotiating that final report, I can just, join Michele in citing those norms. But in addition to that, I would just say that in my view, we still lack two things. First is we need to define what critical infrastructure is, because the view of that is different from country to country. as an example is, for example, I could cite the ongoing Russian-US dialogue that also, deals with those things, and it looks like the understanding of those concrete industries or spheres that critical infrastructure refers to is a bit different. I wouldn't say that it's totally differs, because there are some basic spheres areas where that critical infrastructure exists in most of the countries, right? We taking, for example, finance or banking, or energy, or water supply, etc. Right? But those lists, they're not totally identical. So the first step would be to define what exactly we're referring to when we speak about critical infrastructure. And secondly, of course, until those norms are recommended, there wouldn't be actually, what should I say, there wouldn't be an obligation to stick to those norms. And that is a very big problem in our view. We think that if we really want to find solutions for numerous threats and challenges that arise almost every day, we need to make it an obligation, make it a taboo to attack those branches of critical infrastructure. Of course, it's one of those issues where approaches of countries may differ. They might look at it from different angles, put different emphases, but in our view, it is one of those areas of the discussion where reaching some kind of understanding and compromise is possible. So we really hope that the discussion on this issue of securing critical infrastructure would be launched or continued within the new OEWG. Thank you.
It's not my intention to litigate the OEWG in this forum today, but I would like to comment on a couple of statements that Vladimir made. One, I disagree that we need to come to absolute agreement on what is a critical infrastructure on some common list. That is not necessary. In fact, we agreed a long time ago that the norms talking about critical infrastructure were written to be both generic and sufficiently flexible to accommodate what any country might deem to be its critical infrastructure. The point is that making that list for that country transparent and understandable is a key to observing any of these norms. Secondly, the point that these norms, which are indeed voluntary and non-binding, have now been repeatedly affirmed by now all states at a political level. And I find it very concerning that political obligations that are undertaken and affirmed in the UN General Assembly and repeatedly multilaterally are not considered to have value unless they're codified in a treaty. And why would we trust observance under a codification if we can't trust the word of a nation to observe something that they have signed on to. So I think we are far away from codification of any of these norms, if that's what it takes to get states to live up to what are political obligations. Certainly between the US and Russia, we have a history of undertaking political obligations that have been diligently observed. And I would suggest that we ought to start there and develop a history of practice of observance of these norms that we have all universally now undertaken. And if they merit it by the actions of all states, ultimately a codification may or may not be useful. At this point, I think we have to look at how the technology continues to change. And I would like to refer also to Vladimir's comments about how the OEWG should proceed. I, again, don't intend to litigate that here, but this notion that there should be a series of thematic groups, of which I presume there would be small subsets of nations participating, even if they were consecutive, leads to me back to the criticism that was made of the GGE. Why should any small group of states be the ones to discuss and determine what any changes or new rules, norms, or principles should be, or international law? There is no way, I think, to get from what is advertised as a totally inclusive process to small groups of states working in thematic groups. But, you know, that's a subject for another day. But it all goes to show that our ability to achieve consensus over time really does depend on goodwill, the environment, and the ability to step back, make compromises, and understand that we have common objectives in reducing the prospect that there will be conflict among states based on this technology. So thank you.
As for the thematic subgroups, thematic in our understanding means that those subgroups would be open for anyone, for all the members of this process. It's just that the discussion would be organized in thematic way so that, on one day, states could discuss, problems of law applicability. On the other day, the same amount of countries, 193 countries, would discuss something different. And as for the critical infrastructure, as like I mentioned, there are different opinions, different approaches to this very important issue. And the variety of views is so broad. You've just witnessed the approximate range of those differences. It only confirms the fact that there would be much food for thought and discussions within the OEWG, and we are ready for that, and we welcome those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you both for your reactions and clarifications there. And before concluding, can we maybe touch on one more hot potato? Well, not sure it's a hot potato, but let's see. Cyberspace, there's a lot going on in cyberspace and around it. So the first committee of resolution highlights the necessity also of preventing the use of information resources or technologies for criminal and terrorist purposes, and of course very rightly so. Now, COVID permitting, in January 2022, and that's going to be just a few weeks after the first substantive session of the open-ended working group, the ad hoc committee established to elaborate a convention on cybercrime will begin its work with a view to submitting a draft convention to the General Assembly in 2023. So my question is, what opportunities and challenges can we expect from the coexistence of these two processes? And maybe this time around, Vladimir, Shin, we can start with you, please.
As you know, process, ad hoc committee, well, just like as an OEWG, was initiated by Russia, and Russia last summer introduced its vision of the, or actually draft convention that could be used as a starting point for upcoming discussions of the ad hoc committee. Well, in our view, those processes, they efficiently are aimed at something very similar, at providing more security, at fighting with, with all the evil, in ICT sphere. But in my view, yet they are different, and even the fact that the OEWG is held under the auspices of the first committee, Peace and Security Committee, while the ad hoc committee, is held under the aegis of the third committee, which is, legal one. So those are different processes, and they should not be mixed. I would say like this. I would put it like this. If we, think that those processes are two legs, we should use those two legs while walking toward one goal. That's my vision. Thank you.
Thank you. Michele, Markoff, please.
I agree with Vladimir that they are two separate activities, and we should not conflate them in any way, shape, or form. I think if I were to comment on U.S. Views of the third committee negotiations, we are looking ahead to the first negotiations in January of next year. And in doing so, we will continue to advocate for a focused and human rights respecting UN instrument that provides practical tools for global law enforcement cooperation, while at the same time absolutely protecting human rights and preserving the open, interoperable, secure, and reliable internet we have all used to build our economies. At the same time, the United States continues to strongly support the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, and we are continuing to support expansion of its membership. As we have long maintained, we should leverage our existing diplomatic tools to the fullest extent. We know that China and some other states also want the new OEWG to develop new legal obligations, and the United States firmly opposes this. Given that we don't agree on many elements of how existing international law applies, we don't understand how such an endeavor would be productive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that brings us to the end of this panel. Let me thank you both very much for sharing your insights and expertise on this occasion, and can I please ask the audience to join me in a round of virtual applause. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure, honor to have you both. And that also brings us to the end of this conference, and let me seize the occasion to thank once again our sponsors, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, the Russian Federation, Switzerland, and Microsoft. Of course, we're most grateful to all of the speakers that we've seen throughout the day and who've facilitated these discussions so aptly and greatly. Warm thanks are due first and foremost to UNIDIR's security and technology team that so successfully organized this event with many last-minute COVID-related changes. Thank you very much for being so dynamic. And then last but certainly not least, I would like to thank the audience for your engagement throughout the day. And can you please do us a favor and just take 30 seconds to fill in the feedback form that's linked through the code on your screen, or if you're in the room, by filling in the paper version. We greatly appreciate and value your feedback and certainly take it into consideration for planning of any futures event. And absolutely, we hope and expect to see you at upcoming events of UNIDIR. Thanks very much for joining us today. Have a nice evening.